Hey, welcome to Young Adult Discipleship Roundtable. If you weren't in one of the roundtables yesterday, or they did it maybe different than I'm going to, really this time is going to be driven by your questions and discussion and conversation. And so I'll take a little time to introduce myself. These two are going to introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of just serve as a panel up here, and you guys can ask any questions in your heart, and even if you have things to pitch in from the crowd, please feel free to do that as well. We want to make it as much as a conversation as we can with this size group. So my name's Toby Kavanaugh. I'm the director of the Radiant School of Ministry here. But really, for a lot of my adult life, I lived in China. And that's been kind of a big, huge part of my story. And so when I was 23, my best friend Matt and I decided to move to China for a year to tell people about Jesus. And it was not any ambition for long-term missions, but just kind of offering up a year to the Lord. And God just did something really powerful through that year to kind of show us this huge open door among young adults specifically in China. And so we came back to the States and started inviting basically other young people around our age to go. And so God just really breathed in that early season. So all of a sudden it was like us two, and then the next year there was 15 missionaries that were over there, and then there was 30, and then there were 60. And so like we were like 25 years old, running around like chickens without our heads cut off, having no idea what we were doing. But we were just in this wave of something the Holy Spirit was doing. And Darcy, who's with me today, actually joined that ministry during that time. So we've been running together for the last 15 years. And so really a lot of my background was bringing young adults over to China and getting them activated in missions and ministry. And where sometimes with a ministry like that, the people you're bringing over is like, they wanted to be a missionary in China since they were 3 and they just finished seminary. That was not our approach at all. Ours was like, oh, you've been saved for 6 months? Let's go do this. And so a lot of people we brought were very early in the discipleship process and had not people who had thought about ministry at all. They were maybe in college, and somehow as we spoke in their context, God moved their heart to begin to lay down their lives for him and ended up with them in China. And so it was a lot really of discipling the missionaries and workers. And then also, we were seeing college students come to Christ all over the place in China. And so a lot of discipling college students in the Chinese context. In 2017, we moved back to the States, and we're still leading that ministry. But God began to put a burden on our heart to start places that would raise up future ministers like that right here in the States too. And so in Rochester, New York area, we started a school of ministry there. And then in 2020, brilliantly, right in the middle of COVID, we started a school of ministry here at Radiant. And, you guys maybe have heard this, being in ministry or serving in different ways. A lot of times they say your burden, the people you're burdened to reach are going to be those people maybe 2 to 5 years younger than you, right? So like when you just finished high school, you have a burden to reach teenagers, right? And then as you get a little older, you start to have a burden to reach young adults. And then as you grow older, the people you have a burden for grow older too. It has not worked that way for me at all. From the time I was 19 years old all the way to now at 42, my heart has been for that 18 to 25-year-old group of people, because there's just so many decisions that happen in that time period that literally set the trajectory for their life. And so honestly, the great privilege of my life is that God has allowed me to continue to serve this group of people throughout my life. And I was even watching R.T. Kendall up on the stage, and I'm like, I hope when I'm his age, I can still speak to young people just as well as he does right now. That's kind of hope where I am when I'm 80-something. And so that's kind of my story. Darcy?
My name's Darcy Black. I am, what am I called? I'm the director of sending and growth for the Radiant School of Ministry. I've been in ministry and young adult ministry for 15 years. I've known Pastor Toby for a long time, and we've run together in China. My heart has always just been for young people. I just remember the moment that the Lord asked me, do you want to go to China or do you want to go get your master's? And I just said, I just want to love people. And he was like, there's a lot of people in China. And I was like, touche, there are a lot of people in China. And that just awakened something within me of getting to disciple and work with young women and grow the church there and the leadership team there. And then just since then, I've helped plant and develop. We had an internship with the organization that we worked for, and that I helped kind of develop. And then Pastor Toby asked me to come out here, and so I've been here now for a little over 3 years, and just love getting to see young men and women, specifically young women, raised up and discipled and to love Jesus more. And so I've been doing this for a long time, and I still feel very inadequate, but I love being here.
My name is Stephen Davis. I serve as a Portage location pastor. 6 years ago, I moved here from Colorado to launch that campus. And luckily, it's doing very well. So things that we made the right move following God's leadership, and really honored to be a part of the team here. But originally, my burning passion was also, as Toby said, to invest in young people. And at 18 in Colorado, at this super large mega church, tons of resources, all sorts of young adult ministries, kind of any internship for whatever you want to do, from worship to missions. And I went into a prayer ministry. David Perkins, who's here, was actually overseeing a ministry called Desperation and Desperation Conferences and band, all these different things. And I radically encountered the Lord in a prayer meeting, changed my life. I watched it change a whole bunch of other people's lives, and I just gave myself to it and wrestled with, am I supposed to go into corporate America, finish my business degree? I did do those things, but it was all I wanted to help lead young adults to encounter God's presence, see Him sent all over the earth. And I always thought, I want to minister to them now before I have to deal with the consequences when they're in their 40s. And sure enough, in the role I'm in now, I honestly feel like I'm witnessing. I get a front row seat to witness the people that did not have that kind of an investment in those young years, in those formative years. And so I have this internal struggle on a daily basis of watching people, marriages falling apart, and then I'm watching young people that I'm investing in that are encountering God's presence, being formed in their identity. And so I live in both worlds right now, but I've given the last 20 years of my life to see young adults grow in the Lord. And not all good fruit, but there's a lot of good fruit in there. And so I'm committed to it. I don't do on a daily basis youth ministry and young adults, but I can't stop from investing into them. So.
And these guys are modest. They both served at very high levels, organizationally leading and doing these kinds of things. But the reason I'm most honored to be standing up here with them, or sitting up here with them, I guess, is they're both master disciplers. I just have watched them over years basically have a trail of people behind them that are chasing after Jesus. And they're the real deal. And so, I'm a little biased, but I kind of think what's happening in this room right now might be the most important thing happening at this conference, because I really believe how we steward the young adults that God gives us over this next decade is going to determine the next 40 years of what happens with the church in America. And I just think it's very, very significant. And so just honored to be with you guys, honored to be with people who have a heart and interest in this, and honored to just talk about it together. So with that, just kind of open it up. Questions, thoughts from the room? As far as the adult ministry at the church, that's not our primary role for us three. It's actually shifting right now. We've had a young adult group that actually centers around one of the prayer meetings at the Radiant City Center. And it's kind of had two thrusts to it. One, it's centered around that prayer meeting. And then they'll take another hour that's less preaching or fellowship or things you'd normally think for a young adults group. And it's more basically equipping and training to go out and minister to others. And so it's had like a real high energy, kind of aggressive take to it. But actually right now, things are kind of in the place of shifting. And I think part of it is a desire to see young adults integrated into the overall life of the church more, instead of being kind of a pocket unto themselves. And with that, even the heart to, there's a lot of messages I feel like in our culture that treats young adults like they're teenagers still, when really they're adults, right? And basically helping to kind of help that transition to happen. And so I'm thinking probably where things will be going over this next year is a lot of our young adults group will start focusing in on college students specifically in this region, kind of for things. And so that's a little of the model, but it's honestly very much in flux right now.
So we have a youth group, but they're all growing up into young adults, and we don't have a young adult group yet. We're going to start. Give me one or two things that we have to make sure that the kids are going to be looking for, and that'll draw them. Anybody?
I mean, there's a reason why we're hosting this conference. I mean, it has to center on the presence of God. There is no other thing that we build anything for. And so I think the highest attraction is the fragrance of his of his presence and coming to adore him, because that's what young people are attracted to. They're not attracted to people, personalities. That's all inauthentic to them. It has to be centered and give yourself to one thing. I think as we do that, God will give unique strategies for your region or your people, but it will come, I think, later. And so I would also just insert, like, don't despise the small beginnings. It's just gather in a small room that's not all, decked out, but it's like we're committed to family, culture, loving one another, sharing meals together. When I look back on my young adult formation, it was in those environments that preceded the massive growth that I say that's where I was formed in the depth of my knowledge of the scriptures, knowledge of how to serve one another, honor one another. That's where I was formed, was in living rooms, kitchens. And so I would say you could put it in a house. Like, it doesn't have to even be in a church building.
I think the thing that I would say across my life that I've recognized, we took our students to the Asbury revival, and there's a lot of questions and stuff around that. And as we were kind of talking with some of the students, one of the things that came out was, I was like, first I felt the Lord just convict me of like, who are you to say what revival looks like? I get to say what that looks like, right? But I was like, in a world that facilitates and crafts and mimics all kinds of things, like they can't even look at social media and know, is this picture real, right? Then why wouldn't God come in a simple and authentic, vulnerable way, right? And I've found that with young adults in particular, they are tired of saying, oh, here's something we're putting on for you. Here's something that we've crafted just for you. They just want vulnerability. They want authenticity. They want to know who Jesus is and the realness of who he is. And some of the most powerful moments of my life in discipleship have been when I have said, I'm struggling with that too. Or, hey, actually, you're not crazy for thinking that. Like, I've asked those questions. Or like, oh, well, just trust the Lord. Like, no, it's hard to trust him sometimes. And to have those conversations with young people, to know I can ask the scary questions to someone else and they'll walk with me through it and not just say like, oh, you don't look like this box. And so just to create and craft a vulnerable, authentic relationship with people and just saying like, we can talk about those things. I ask my students all kinds of questions like, what are your temptations? Have you struggled with this thing this week? What were you looking at? Like, and I will ask them very point blank and say, these are the things I'm struggling with. These are the moments that I've had breakthrough or things like that. And just finding that, like Pastor Stephan said, of just authentic vulnerability, real, like who the real Jesus is, not the thing that's been crafted for them. They're not like a millennial generation, right? Where we have like been used to kind of how churches looked a certain way. They're like, I just want to sit with you and be like, this is hard. And is Jesus going to meet me in it? And like I had one girl one time, she was sharing with me, this boy had broken her heart. And she's like, but I know that there's, people all over the world who are struggling with, not having enough food or they don't have housing. And I just was like, I didn't even want to be there that night. I was sick. And I was like, I don't even want to talk to you. I felt like the Lord was like telling me to go. And I was just kind of like, oh, okay. And I finally just like, it hurts Jesus that you're hurting. I hope you know that. Like, he's sad that you're sad. And that like broke things for her. And because of that conversation, she was like, that's what I want. And she accepted the Lord that night. And so just finding that like when we come in vulnerability and say, you can ask your questions, you don't have to look pretty. It's okay if you look messy. It's okay that you don't look like what you think the church looks like. When we come in vulnerability and authenticity, they actually get to experience the real Jesus. And that's what I find that young adults really want.
To take like a little bit of a futurist angle on what these guys are both sharing, the ability to mimic things is exponentially increasing right now. Obviously, artificial intelligence is like a huge thing on the news and in the collective thought right now. And one of the things that's crazy with it is the tremendous ability it has to mimic, right? Like, big news story right now is someone thought her daughter was kidnapped. Basically, she got a call on the phone with the daughter's exact voice talking to her and saying this, and it was just an AI thing basically copying it. They're probably months away from being able to do that just seamlessly with video, basically, where they could take your picture and basically make a video with you, your voice, saying anything you want. And as basically the ability to mimic things is kind of exponentially increasing with technology, the value of authenticity and real in-person connection is going to also infinitely move up in value. And so you're going to see, while that's true right now, what we're saying, over this next decade, it's going to be multiple times true, basically. The only thing that's going to be real is when I'm in person with you, talking with you, caring with you. And honestly, what pastors and ministers do is going to be one of the few things that remains that can't be faked and replaced by computers. And it's pretty cool, actually. You have one of the few jobs that's hardest to replace, for those that are pastors and ministers in the room, and even those of us that are just discipling in the room. The one other thing I would say, and this is, I think, contrarian probably to most of what you will read maybe in How to Reach Gen Z material and books that are going around right now, which is young people are looking for something worth giving their life for. In those years of your life, basically, you're deciding your values of your life, what your life is going to be about, and you're looking for a purpose and a cause that's worth giving your life for. And I say it's contrarian because I feel like some of the material on Gen Z right now really emphasizes how they're more conservative than past generations in the sense of like a little more timid, a little less likely to step out, a little more protective on how they move on things. But even for Gen Z, that's just degrees. For young people in general, they're looking for something worth giving their life for. And actually, as you raise the bar of discipleship, it makes it more attractive. And that's very contrarian, because the thought is, if I raise the bar of discipleship too high, it's going to scare people away and no one will come to our group or anything like that. And so ministers will lower the bar of discipleship as far as they can go while still feeling like they're not sinning or something like that. And I actually just think it's the absolute backward approach. The reality, what I've seen over years, this is someone who looked people in the eye I'd never met before and said, lay down your life, go to China, right? Okay, like that's a very scary thing to do. That is a very huge step. That is not a small thing. But what I've just seen over and over again is that as you raise the bar of discipleship, actually there's something about that now makes it worth giving my life for and draws people in a different way. And I just think that's really important to understand, because it's backwards to what you might hear other people say and you might even think just naturally, but to me that's how it actually plays out.
I was just going to say, I think too, people want to know that you see that in them. Some of the best conversations I've had with Toby is like, I think you could do this. I'm like, no, not me, I can't. But knowing that Toby believes that I could has made me step into some of those things. And so they have a whole world that tells them, you're this, you're this, you're this. And all of a sudden you're sitting in front of them saying, I believe you could be more than that. And they're like, okay, I want to do that.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about discipleship from like the point of view of kind of just transitioning from like a place where there's, for example, where we have like, I feel like we're in a transitional time of the growth of our church, and so sometimes you like come into something that's already established, but can you talk about transitioning from like a smaller number of people doing a lot of things in discipleship to how do you like spread that out a little bit more? How did you pull people in to help disciple young adults? Does that make sense?
It's kind of gone from just relational, and now there has to be some organizational component to it.
Yeah, or like one person can't be, have a personal relationship with every single person in the group. That kind of idea. How do you spread that out? How do you pull people in or identify people who would be good for that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's happened a bit in our context, being a video campus, and people having to go over a hurdle that's not live preaching. It's just a lot of unique nuances. I had always vowed that I would never lead anything like that, and so that's what I'm doing. And yeah, and the reality of what the scripture says, and I think we quote it a lot, but equipping saints, truly like equipping them. So if they're feeling used, for them to accomplish tasks that you don't want to do is not equipping. So how do you effectively equip them? What are you actually calling them to? What's the vision that you're putting out in front of them? Is it picking up the trash, or is it setting an atmosphere of worship unto salvation? Whatever the main thrust of your church is, I think vision casting is critical, because what are you giving yourself to? When I was getting engaged in this larger ministry, there was so many different things I could jump into, but I was committed to seeing an entire generation in desperate pursuit of God. And so every decision that we made and everything that was called out of me, it was unto that. I see you facilitating this part of the ministry unto that vision. And so it is that giving yourself to something extremely large. And then I'm going to help you along the way, but I'm also going to create an environment you can fail. I feel like one of the reasons we've created insulated environments, it's like wrapping a kid in foam pool noodles, and then we're surprised that when they bump into something, they have a broken wrist. And so I think we as the church can actually create safe environments for people to fail, and then you walk them through that. That's what we do with our kids. They fail all the time, and we lead them through it. And so I think when we establish a culture that is for equipping, people will give themselves to it, and then that's how you scale. So I can have you now oversee this group, and it's not just to janitorial work. It's unto, we're doing this actually for the functionality of relationship, family, love, servanthood. And so that's what I have to cultivate that in my own campus. So those are some of the tricks, I guess.
Most of the last 5 weeks, I spent traveling away from my family with a team of students that were speaking in different churches and youth groups and things like that. And I would just go to church every night and sit there and watch them do it. And it's like, I'm the pastor, or I'm the person, who maybe you'd think would be invited to speak. We were at Barrett's, right? And I just would sit there, and if it was a really key moment, I would get down on my face and start praying on the front row, basically, because I didn't know what was going to happen.
True adventure.
Those were like my two roles. And it's what Stefan's talking about. It's that mindset that basically says, I'm letting go of the ring, basically, to use some Lord of the Rings picture here. I'm letting go of the ring, basically, so someone else can carry it, someone else can run. And it is the most difficult thing to do in ministry. Because if you're leading the young adult group and you put someone else forward and they flop a little bit, you look stupid, right? You look bad. So there's that whole side of it. Plus, if we're really honest, don't we all love the feeling when you stand up and preach and everyone tells you how great you did afterwards? You're the best discipler there's ever been. You're such a fantastic leader. And I'm like, oh no, that's not true. It's Jesus, right? But that thing feels like a back massage to us. And to actually let go of that and let that go to somebody else is really difficult to do if we're honest with ourselves. And so it actually takes a tremendous sacrificial father or mother's heart to do that, right? Because that's what a father or mother does. That I lay down my today for your tomorrow, right? I sacrifice my ceiling that you could stand on my shoulders and you could go higher. That's the heart of a father or a mother. And it really does take that, because there is like this awkward in-between moment from where you guys are right now and where it's transitioning into of like, I'm putting other people forward. It's not quite as good as when I did it myself, but it's necessary for things to multiply and for the saints to actually be equipped. And looking that transitionary period in the face and accepting it, it takes the wisdom of playing the long game, and it's really hard to do in that moment. And I know you guys obviously are not of those that shrink back. You're going to do it, but that's tough. And just steeling yourself for, I'm multiplying disciples. I'm not gathering a crowd. I'm multiplying disciples. I'm not gathering a crowd. I'm multiplying disciples. I'm not gathering a crowd. And basically just stealing your heart for that, because as you see little problems and stuff like that, you got to remember that along the way.
I think one thing that both of them said, I think it's important to cast vision for your team, like constantly cast vision. Because if I could work with Toby, we might not do things the same way. We do things very differently, but our vision is the same. And so it's very important to cast vision for whoever's working with you. But even as Pastor Toby said, just letting them fail. I just got done traveling for about a month with our students on expedition. And, we'll have missionaries asking me to preach. I'm like, well, here's this 18-year-old, let him preach, right? And then coming alongside of them afterwards saying, hey, here, actually, that probably wasn't very biblical. Maybe we'll go this way. And just giving a little direction, like might have been a little bit blasphemy there. I don't know. But just trusting, because the Lord is going to do stuff in them, and the Lord wants to grow them. And the Lord took me one time, I remember, I had wanted to do this thing, and I was like taking out trash, and I was like, everybody else is getting to do the ministry part, and I had to do this part, even though it was like, I know I could be better than that, you know? And I felt the Lord just challenge me and say, like, Darcy, who has the greatest impact? Is it Billy Graham because he's preached to millions? Is it the pastor that led him to the Lord, or was it the janitor that made sure he had a place to sit? It's like, no, they all have an impact in the kingdom, and like not one is greater than the other. And if I can push a student forward and release them into the things that the Lord has for them, then like their impact is going to be so much greater on their generation than what I have. But as long as you're casting vision, then I can say, ooh, this is a really tough conversation. What would Toby do? What's the vision here? And even if we don't do it the same, they have the vision. And so even as we gather leaders, I'm constantly telling them, okay, this is what's important. This is why we do this. This is why this matters. And I see them making decisions that I would make because they have the vision for it. And so just as long as your team has the vision, I think that's really important.
So what Darcy's saying is so important. Sorry, I know we want to ask more questions. I just feel like I got to say it, though. The issue of debriefing with others after you serve together is so gigantic. I actually was really challenged listening to Michael Miller talk last night about ways he would, basically, his people would lead worship, and he would go up to them afterwards and like, actually, we didn't start with Thanksgiving, and that was not the right way to do that, you know? And just that level of coaching is so necessary when someone's new in ministry. It's not harsh, it's not mean, it's loving, and it's caring, and it's fathering, and it's mothering. And I can remember conversations my dad had with me like that growing up, like, hey, we're Kavanaughs, we don't do things that way. Or, you know, like hey, this is gonna hurt you. And just those kind of conversations as we went through life. And it can be very tempting, again, to take the shortcut not to have those conversations after they do something or after you do something together. And you're basically wasting all the discipleship effort you're doing when you do that. Literally, it just takes the 5 minutes afterwards to talk about it, to basically take their growth from the experience from a 1 to a 10. And I'm tempted myself all the time to just, I'm busy, I gotta do this, I gotta prepare for this, and to skip that 5-minute conversation, and it is leaving so much kingdom potential on the floor every time you skip that conversation. And that's just really important what she said.
I also find it's important, like, you know, when you save chairs, right? You just put your coat across, and it's just like you're sitting in one seat. I find that if I'm not sitting in that chair, somebody else will fill it. And so if I'm constantly thinking, oh, I got to fill up all these chairs, then they think, oh, the chair's full. And if I say, you do it, and let them do it, somebody will come in, and the Lord will actually put somebody in that chair instead of me feeling like I have to fill them all.
So our ministry is starting to gain traction, but something we've noticed is none of the young adults that are in there are from our youth program. And so we're trying to figure out a good transition from that senior graduating, staying in town kind of thing. How do we handle that transition?
That's a great question. If that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you have invested in them 1, 2, 3, 4 years, if you have some of those 4-year students, I think it's the vision casting of like, we want you to step in to help serve, which is ultimately leadership, to help cultivate this. You already have it. We taught it to you in these years. Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah.
Can I say something to that? So I'm at my home church did something where they would take the seniors, and if the young adult group was doing a dinner party or doing a game night, they'd let the seniors like toward the end of their senior year come out to that and open that door of invitation, so that when they graduated, they weren't walking into a new
walking into a room with people they had known because they'd had dinner with them and they had games with them, and you also took time with your young adults and you made sure they emphasized, hey, we're bringing in these seniors so they know we won't fight, we're not going to tear them apart, we're going to bring them in and we're going to build them up. And that was one thing that I've seen done and done really well.
When I moved here, so this was like 3 years ago, I wasn't starting a young adult group, but I was starting the school of ministry here. I made sure the youth pastors were my best friends in the church. Like I was giving them T-shirts, like anything I could do to communicate to
Divine
them.
manipulation.
You're important. I love you. Bribing, whatever you could do along the way. Why? Because both them and I can only win together. Right? Like you guys are in this world. You know the statistics. 75 to 80% of all Christian teenagers fall away from Christ within their first semester on a public university. Okay? I mean, it is like the statistics are like, if you don't want to vomit when you read the statistics, then you're not actually understanding what they are. And it is terrifying in some ways. Obviously, we believe the Lord is moving fresh in this generation right now. But and so your youth pastor cannot win without that handoff being well, and they may or may not understand that. And as a young adult leader, you cannot win without that handoff working well. And so anything you can do to foster relationship, friendship, mutual service, mutual love between those two different leaders in the church is really important. And then I thought what you said is really good. There's a number of things. I remember early on in my ministry, I was a youth pastor. And we did a senior retreat, basically. It was like a 3-day, overnight, kind of special connection, teach about sense of calling for their future. It was a pretty cool event. And we would bring the young adult leaders into that event, basically. Similar idea to what you're talking about, but just basically somehow making sure that handoff is really strong before the graduation moment actually happens. And so retreat, inviting them to your young adult events is big. You coming to some maybe key youth events I think would be big, but just anything like that will really help that process. Because once you know them and you spent 3 nights with them at this retreat or something like that, it's like now you have the ability to send them a text message yourself and get them to come to something.
Can I speak to that? So I experienced that same kind of thing when I was in youth group. Like all the friends that I had in youth that we like really aren't running after Jesus anymore. And I was like, oh no, how do we fix this issue? And I can't exactly speak to like the ministry transition side of things going from youth course to young adult ministry because our young adults is just kind of like a casual monthly hangout. But in terms of keeping the students in youth around after they graduate, obviously some are going to go out to school. That's fine. That's just how it is. But really what we've seen that from keeping the students around after they graduate, for those that still feel called to this area, is just really like running after the Lord and seeking prayer and revival because it ties in throughout like all of our church Sunday morning into youth. And so we're preaching on revival on Sunday mornings, talking about what God is doing across the land, and then on Wednesday nights, we're coming in talking to our students about the same thing, saying, what is that looking like in your life? What have you seen in your generation? And so like back and forth, Sunday to Wednesday, back and forth, we're like, Lord, this is all about you. How do I jump in? How do I run after you with all that I have? And so just really I would say just unity in the church culture, but also just pursuing Jesus first and foremost. If all of us can get that, the students will absolutely see that. And be like, what can I do? How can I get involved? What do you want me to do? I want to jump in and do it. And so especially the past couple of years, we've been really starting to see that again.
That's cool.
I think it's important to, like, one thing that we work really hard on with Reading at School of Ministry is kind of making sure that our year 3 students are connecting, or our year 2 students are connecting with our first year students. Because there's something about a young person seeing someone else who's just a couple of years older than them doing something that they want to do. And so, we have our student Jada, and she just got back from the Philippines. And so she's kind of, the last 8 months she was serving with a missionary there. And there's something about seeing that person being like, oh, she's 20 and just like fully gave 8 months of her life to that. And so I think it's really important with your young adult ministry to have them involved in your youth ministry, because there's something about, oh, I want to be like that. Like if there's someone who's, 21 and they're pursuing Jesus while they're in college and like loving after him and having prayer meetings, I could do that. And there's something even about, again, it's releasing the like, oh, I'm going to have my hands on this. It's saying like, I'm trusting this 21-year-old to disciple, this person. And I think it's hard because, students can be anywhere from like 12, right? And then you have like a depending on your young adult thing, it'd be like 30, and it's like there's not really connection there all the time. But just seeing young people pursuing after Jesus does something. Like some of the most key moments in my life was at camp when I saw somebody who is a few years older than me doing something, and I was like, oh, I could lead worship. I could do that. I could, pray like that. And I think that changes things for young people.
One of the most powerful things to give a teenager is somebody who is cool and 3 years older than them that's chasing after Jesus with all their heart. Like I literally can look to my own personal experiences and direction towards ministry, and I can look at 3 or 4 people that had that impact on me.
Same.
And I think Stefan was saying this at first, but at Radiant, actually, how well they get young adults serving among the teenagers is so strong. It's almost like a shadow young adult ministry in the church, I would say. It's like there's so many of them that are so committed and so bought into that it almost has the full effect of a young adult ministry without a young adult ministry even happening. And so that's a big part too.
Just what you said right there is kind of where we're at. We have a lot of young adults that are serving with the students, and there's been a back and forth as to do you need to have a ministry that's specific to young adults, or do the young adults that sit with the students and we just serve the students? So if we're making a case, should there be a separate ministry that's geared for just the young adults, and still continue to allow them to serve in the students, like you're saying, but also having a separate component in which they receive ministry, like you said, between 18 and 25, there's so many decisions that need to be made. So do you have a different component? And second to that, who is, I know we can pray about it, but then looking at the different challenges that might arise, do you have one of the young adults lead that, or do you have like an older married couple lead that so that the young adults too maybe have somebody that they're also looking to leading it, or is it better if it's led by somebody of their own demographic? That's a great question.
So many thoughts. I mean, I think one of the concerns, if I'm really honest with you, that I'm wrestling with is when you continually create designated ministries for every age group, I think it perpetuates, honestly, I use a strong word, like a codependent relationship where they become dependent on me. And yet the gospel is I'm going to train you to go. And so what I have seen is if we create ministries all crafted and catered to them, it instead of them being outward focused, it's like they just, and they like have this magnetic pull. And then I don't actually see any gospel functionality out of them because it's like I can't function without this group supporting me to do what I need to do. And so I think now if I was in that position, I would say you have to be serving somewhere as a young adult, and we'll create environments in homes or in other places to create authentic relationship. We're not going to build a ministry for you. So I'm not answering that as if I'm overseeing it, but I think if I was put there, I'd have to be wrestling with, do I actually want to build a young adult ministry unto itself? Recently, in the former model that he was talking about, we were intentionally, his incredible curriculum to evangelize college campuses. So even if the young adult was not on a college campus, we had a whole a notebook that was like, this is how you evangelize. And we would pray for those college campuses, pray for those students that they're engaging with. And then, was it that night or on a weekend, they would, maybe you can give more to it, but we were not building a young adult ministry for them. We were building a young adult ministry to go reach other young adults. And by doing that, you create camaraderie. And that's what they're looking for. I just want a cause, and I'll build camaraderie. But if it's about me, I don't know, I think it dies. I think it's a graveyard.
I feel sensitive talking about this because I don't know that everyone, I don't think I can speak for Radiant in this, because I think even within our leadership team, as we're wrestling with this tension he's talking about, we probably land in different places. If it were me, I would probably start something unique for young adults, but that was super service outreach oriented like that. That basically was mobilizing, multiply, reach your friends for Christ, that had that kind of vibe to it. Because the one thing I do think that young adults have in a special way is Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7 when he's talking to single adults. He talks about undivided focus and devotion, right? There is a unique capacity for undivided focus and attention that you have before you're married and have kids that you never will have in the same way again. And I actually think it behooves the church to capture that. And so I would probably start something focused on them, but that was like very outward focused with it, not like young adult thing, come meet your future spouse kind of thing. Like I would not touch that with a 10-foot pole.
And who would you have lead?
Oh yeah, that was a great question too.
Them have like what you're saying. You just have them. It's a group, so they make a group leader, so they don't necessarily have pastoral oversight.
Partly it has to do with who's anointed and called to do it. But in my ideal situation, I would have someone a few years older than them that's married, and so there's a little capacity for kind of fathering and mothering that's happening there spiritually, surrounded by a team of young adults that are leading it together. That's what I would do.
Yeah, so just kind of going off everything you guys said, is there a specific thing you guys have taught or some ways you guys have brought up to like activate the students, reaching students, just like off the top of your guys' head?
I mean, the basic thing, we just train people how to share the gospel. And like, you would be shocked at how many people don't know how to share the gospel. And so we train them how to share the gospel, and we kind of dive right into developing them as leaders. Like we say right away, you're a leader. And that's kind of what I would say would be our main focus, is just kind of saying like, here's how you share the gospel, here's how you do it, here's how you lead, here's how you pray, here's how you pray for this sort of thing. And then we just kind of dive into, as a leader, this is what you do next. And we just do it very simply, and then we make them do it. Like we say, okay, let's go share the gospel now. We'll go with you. We do it with them. And that's what I have found has been kind of the thing that has changed people's lives, is when we say, we'll go with you and we'll share the gospel. And even if it's like, oh, I haven't done this for a little bit, and to like pray over someone or just ask, can I pray for you? Can I do this? It like changes how they do things. And once they catch the vision for sharing the gospel, I mean, I cannot tell you how many people we've seen come to know the Lord this last year, because our students are like, we want to go on Western's campus and share the gospel, and like leading prayer meetings, asking the Lord to heal sick people, like just because they catch, oh, it's so easy to share the gospel. It's so easy to pray for someone. I don't have to be afraid. And then just to develop them as leaders in that. That's what I would say.
Yeah. And not just share on campus, but share with their friends, their coworkers, share with their family members. We're seeing all those people come to Christ.
Can you speak to that? Because the concentric circles.
Yeah.
Even in the kind of counterintuitive on like concentric circles, you guys are like, reach your family, reach your friends. But I think in other contexts, it's been inverted. Right. But we're actually seeing it go inside out.
Let me share a little round trip to get there. So there's a few barriers between people and sharing the gospel, and this is not just young adults. I had to really wrestle with this when we were bringing people over to China that were not like long-term missionaries, but were relatively new believers and still being discipled. How do we mobilize them to share the gospel? One of the barriers, and I think this is the one we're most aware of, is the why, right? Like, why is it important to share the gospel? Why does this matter? Why is this worth facing difficulty? Why is this worth being rejected? And just, talking about Jesus' heart for the lost people, talking about eternal realities, these things. And that's the one I think that's most accessible, and we've touched on the most, and we've seen taught on the most. But I found there's two other huge barriers that we almost never talk about at all. And the second one is who, basically. Who am I supposed to share the gospel with? My pastor up on stage is screaming I should share the gospel with people, and I feel like I'm a bad Christian because I don't, but I don't really know who or where to even start for this. And so we have a ton of exercises we do to help people with that. The very simplest one might just be, okay, we're going to close our eyes and pray and ask the Holy Spirit to highlight 5 people in your life right now, and we're going to write their names down a list, and we're going to start praying for them. Right? Like it can be that simple. We do a thing called oikos mapping. Oikos is the Greek word, not for yogurt, but for household, and it's the word that's used in the New Testament when it says, "You and your whole household shall be saved." And the word in Greek for household, that oikos, is not like me, my brother, my sister, my parents. It was a much broader group of people that included all the servants that were connected to a Greek household, a Roman household, different people even that were in close relationship to that household were all included in that term. So we basically help people map out their own personal network of relationships. And then I'm not gonna do it right now, but like literally when someone gets saved, I would do this with them within the first 2 days of them getting saved. Basically of just, okay, who are people in your life that need to know God too? And so that, they got their family, it kind of branches out from there. They got different clubs and groups they're in, their branches out from there. They got their roommates, they got their classmates. So they're just starting to become clear, who are the people that Jesus has put in my life that I personally have a responsibility to contend for? And so that who question is huge. And so if you're not answering that for people, it's probably not that they are lazy Christians. It's probably they want to do good. They just don't know who to start with. And then the third one that's huge is the how, basically. And this is where, honestly, most people in the church are. And if we're probably completely honest, probably a lot of us in the room are in this place, I'm not really sharing the gospel as much as I would want to with other people. And part of it is I just don't feel confident in the how of the moment. And so one of the things we found is honestly just helping everybody become very clear with some kind of a simple gospel presentation. And it can seem so dumb, or it can seem so, this is like the 1970s way to share the gospel or something like this. We use a presentation called the 3 circles. Has anyone heard or seen that before? Okay, that's worth a YouTube search for you. Like a lot of times I think we've seen like this bridge and the cross filling the gap, right? That might be the one we would think of for something like that, or 4 spiritual laws. I find the 3 circles is a little stronger for today's generation maybe than that 4 spiritual laws picture. But it's just similar, just a simple gospel presentation. And basically we'll get with people and we practice sharing our testimonies and we share them with each other. And then we go out and we share them with other people that week. And then we talk about it afterwards. And then we pray for the people that we shared with. And then we train them how to share some part of the gospel presentation. So we'll go out together and I'll share the gospel. And at some part, I'll be like, Darcy. And then, then Darcy will jump in and kind of share the part that she's worked on. And then I'll hop back in and kind of take it from there. And then we kind of will do that until Darcy feels comfortable sharing the whole thing. And so just like we invest significant energy, time, one-on-ones so that people feel confident and competent to share the gospel. And so that's a game changer once that happens.
And, I mean, the results are there. I mean, literal family members, brothers, sisters, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles in the last 2 years, all these testimonies of our students, people are coming to the Lord.
There's one girl, she worked in like a home for older people, and she probably has led 15 plus people to Christ in this home, like over the last year and a half. Like it's amazing, like what's happened, but lots of those kind of stories.
Going back to discipling and the mother-father relationship, thankfully I've been in this church and passing that on to you has been really easy transition. But what as parents of college students, what are maybe a couple of healthy and unhealthy things that are encouraging and not enabling, or like what would be the most helpful for us to do for them to step into their role of young adults and be there but not hover over?
It's a great question. For context, my oldest is 12 years old. Your oldest is 10. And so, to really give you a great answer, I'd want to give you someone who actually had done that with their kids. But on a pastoral side, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, we even I did young youth ministry for so many years, and I think it was trying to find the vein of the church, and I was getting to know those parents. So I think young adult ministry, I was doing it within the context of an internship, and so they were flying, paying money to be discipled, like a context where you're doing it within your church where parents are still involved. The way that I feel like you would have to do that is relationships still with those parents as a ministry leader is still a critical part, so that we're saying the same thing. And even informing parents, one of our, I think it's our kids ministry uses the phrase that we partner with parents. And I'm asking how can we infuse that into our student ministry, and then even for the local young adults, because the parents are the best disciple makers. Now, there might be the most resistance over years from that student or that child to the parent, But often what happens is when that parent knows that the church is saying the same thing, it's like all the magnets touch and they have revelation, aha moments. Everyone's saying the same thing. I can't escape. And so I think as a parent, you don't want to say something. You have to fully agree with the doctrine, the culture of the church, but when you're all saying the same thing, to me, there's synergies there, and you're saying it in different ways, in different moments. You have family room moments. I don't have those, but I have these other coffee shop moments. And when we have all of those are saying it, something is connecting in their heart and their mind. So.
Can I just one thing as a parent of kids your age, um, having gone through that, there's nothing worse to do to a 18, 19, 20-year-old than have them know that there's a conflict between the parent and the ministry leader. That to put that young adult in that position is difficult.
One of the things just for myself as a parent, and again, my oldest is 12, is I actually am jealous for the attention of their spiritual leaders in their life because of that. I want that they're getting it from all sides. And I can feel it myself even a little bit already, is there can be a little insecurity in seeing your children take on other mentors. But I just want to say, if as long as they're the right kind of people, I actually think it's really, really important because there is a developmental thing that's going on in that 15 to 25 where they are needing to emotionally separate from you as the parent. And that is always going to be bumpy, and there's always going to be friction in that process, even in the best of situations. And so you want other people that also are supporting basically those messages, especially during that time, so that developmental separation can happen without them having to separate from your faith, right, or other things like that as a part of the process.
I think I would just say to like choose the right things to get annoyed about. Like I remember my dad had passed away, and I was 20 something and 21, and I remember coming home from college, and my mom, I'm like, I'm gonna go to the gas station to get a drink, and she was like, no, you don't need that. And I was like, I know, but I'm gonna go like get a Dr. Pepper, and she's like, yeah, but you don't need to, just save your money. And it was like this tension of like, I'm not 15 anymore. I don't need your permission to walk across the street, but I'm also trying to honor you. And so like we had to work through a lot of different things, but just choosing. And so now like the conflict that we went through, we have like this incredible relationship, but like she so is encouraging of my leaders and like only ever talks good about them and just like loves those things and will choose the things to like speak into that are maybe like, hey, let's correct this sort of stuff. And so I think there, like Pastor Toby said, there is that disconnect of like, I have to be an adult. I have to learn how to do this on my own, but I want you to do it with me. And I don't know how, and as a young person, you don't always know how to ask that in a way that's like, but let me still be a little bit free.
So my husband and I just recently stepped into the position of like taking more of a leadership role for our young adults. And so I guess I'm just wondering like how we can be like disciples and leaders for like our peers, I guess, when they still like it's like friendships, but still we want to like be good leaders in that, good disciples, like in those kinds of relationships too.
Don't let anybody look down on you because you're young, but be an example for the believers, right? That's what Paul says to Timothy. And age is basically irrelevant in this process. It's, are you willing to embrace the mantle of I'm going to be an example for you? And am I going to be a leader in the situation? And it sounds like your spiritual leaders have identified that on you and set you apart for that. And so part of it is just owning it and embracing, okay, like these guys are my peers. I'm not better than them in any kind of way, but I'm choosing to be an example.
I think too, just learning that like there does need to be sometimes a little bit of distance between. I'm very pro like welcoming people into my life. I have young women who like go grocery shopping with me, and I show them, you know, this is what you should buy, that kind of stuff. But there still needs to be like sometimes there's jokes or things or moments where I'm like, this isn't for me, this is for them, and it can create a little bit of distance. I think like there needs to be closeness, but distance in. You're not just my best friend. You're, you know, there's, I don't know if that makes sense, but a little separation.
I don't know exactly your scenario, but I just feel led to say this, so hopefully it hits and it's helpful. But like, be courageous in your leadership, and you will guarantee to have transition. People that were serving, that now that you're leaders will step away, and that's okay. Don't get discouraged. God will bring the next people. And so just having that abundance and growth mentality, not being so concerned that if your friends want to act, maybe it's in their heart to remain friends. Let them remain friends, and but step into your mantle of leadership. And so just trusting God, like not in a cliche way, like in an activated, trusting God way, that God's gonna surround you with the right leaders, and trusting and praying and believing for and recruiting with your new vision to call those people forward.
5 minutes left.
So to talk about that, I think one of the hardest things for young Christians and leaders is that act of being vulnerable. And so not only just to be vulnerable, but to be vocal about that. And so when we were vulnerable and vocal about it to our friendships and our peers and stuff, there was a natural separation and things kind of went the way that God planned it to. But we were just honest and vulnerable with them why we decided to do the things that we did, why we decided to shift our life a certain way. And that really transitioned us into a more leadership role that we were in.
What's your guy, Stefan? We've been having similar conversations about what to do with the like young adult group of people that you were talking about. Like it just seems like in some ways you're delaying the period of ending adolescence by continuing to keep a segmented group when they're adults and they can be integrated to the church body. What's your guys' strategy for ending it and making the transition or forcing transition into a larger church body?
Yeah, I think this is where we have a kind of a unique thing. Like, I don't know if I have a model that's currently existing at Radiant to tell you about, but I think what we've kind of been saying in a more pattern or thematic way is, how do you call young people to get involved into the church? Because what we were seeing is a church within a church, and so we're trying to break that mold. And so they actually function under the theological teaching, under the senior pastor. We're not trying to create another pastor under shepherd, but grow into sitting in this environment, growing in, this. And we're potentially and most likely shifting, don't tell anybody this, out of this room, but we're processing that from junior high through high school, because we don't want to create all these consumeristic models for them. This is church. Sunday morning, we go to church. Now, young, fifth grade and younger, like, we're going to create an environment for them to have curriculum that's for their age group. But they're making a pretty big jump at middle school or junior high. And we're starting to say that's church family. And so we're processing that right now. So really anything above fifth, sixth grade and up, we're not going to do this hyper-focused thing. And even our Wednesday night environment is meant to enrich them. They just did a sermon series on training for tribulation. It's like, what? When I was doing youth ministry 15 years ago, we were not doing that. It was still dating, topics. Yeah, and I'm like, I'm watching young people, our youth pastors here are training them in tribulation, and they're calling them to campus prayer meetings. And so Wednesday night is fueling them for that mission. And so we're not just coming together to feel good about, surviving being a Christian. Like, we're calling them to be on the offensive, not, all of this. I don't need to preach at you, but that's just kind of a general statement.
I think one thing that I actually think Radiant does really well is we kind of open up volunteer stuff to any age. I mean, obviously there's certain age groups, but like, you'll see a high schooler serving in production. You'll see, all kinds of stuff. And I think when they're interacting with people of all age groups, there's something even about being like, oh, I'm on the parking team. I know this person. I see them every week. I think it's really important when you say, hey, you're welcome into this space, regardless of your age. One of the best seasons of my life was when I was mid-20s, and I chose to be a part of what I would call like an old lady Bible study. And I was like, by 35 years, the youngest person in the room. And I loved it because they were the ones who showed up every Sunday. They were always at church. They were the ones that if I was sick, they would bring me something. They'd pray for me. Like, because they were the ones I wanted to look like in 30 years, right? And so I think when we welcome young people in and say, you're welcome in this space, even if it's not your typical space. And so I think, like Pastor Stefan said, just having that door open and saying, like, you don't fit in just this box, or you're only, oh, you should only be a part of youth group or whatever, saying, hey, you're welcome to come here and be a part of this. I think even small groups, like, I don't always love just young adult small groups. I'm like, no, I'm 35, but when I was 24, it was like, I want to know what it's like to be a mom and be married, and I want to see it, and not just the married small groups. Like, I want to be a part of that. I want to know what that's like. And so I think when we let young people into our space, again, it's the same as a young adult with a teenager saying, oh, in 5 years, my life could look like that. Oh, I could potentially have a marriage that looks like that. I could have a family that looks like that. That's what I want. I want to look like that. And so I think Radiant does an excellent job of inviting people in to serve and volunteer and get them involved. Like, we have young people who, we even have like junior hires who serve in kids ministry and things like that, because we're just very good at, I think, seeing it as a family thing and not just like, oh, this is where you belong. And so I think that's really important.
My closing contrarian thought on some of this stuff is, I think the idea you're talking about is these groups that get set up for young adults basically around the idea that somehow they are needier than other groups of people, right? And so they need this extra thing to basically be able to function. I think that's the idea we're trying to dismantle. The thing I do think is unique about young adults is they can be mobilized at another level beyond what other groups of people can. And I don't want to throw those two things out together, because I think it's easy to do that, of like, no, they are actually a full, complete person, has everything they need for life and godliness. That's what the scriptures say. And so that, like, oh, we need to give them a place because they can't do life otherwise, like, let's throw that out. But to recognize young adults, especially maybe up until the time they're married or even start having kids, there is a unique period of time there that will never be there again, where there is availability, there is potency, there is power, they're closer to their peers, the gospel can spread quicker from them to their peers than in other age groups and things like that, and we don't want to lose things we can do uniquely in that time period. Because if you study revival history or missions history, the kingdom of God always advances when single young adults are mobilized to go. That's every revival, every missions movement, that is at the core of what's happening. And so we don't want to lose that in this generation. Yeah. And so that's the end of our time together. But for those of you in the room, especially that are in the fray, you're leading young adult groups, you're discipling young adults, you're right in the middle of that, I just want to say that you guys are on the front lines of the battle, not just for this generation right now, but literally for returning, for preparing the earth for Christ's return. I mean, you guys are right in the middle of a generation where God is doing significant things right now. And so honor to you, and just say, do not grow weary in doing good, for you will reap a harvest in due time if you do not give up. And a lot of times it's just continuing to plod on and not give up. That's the key for what's happening. So love and honor to you guys as you go. Thanks for being with us today.